Going. Okay, good evening, everybody. Hope you're all well, healthy. I have two granddaughters with corona. Should have refuah shlema, but much more importantly, right now, we continue refuah shlema to Malka Schreiben and Malka and Avram Schreiben's granddaughter Hallel. I saw a video this evening. Nebuch, the poor little baby, 9-10 weeks old, on a respirator. And trying to get her healthy enough that they can operate on her. So Bezrat Hashem should be a refuah shalema for everybody. Okay, we're going to do something a little different at the beginning today. We're going to deal with a question from the studio audience, so to speak, a riddle that'll be brief, and then a general question that'll lead us into the text. So let's start off with this question from the studio audience. Last week, right after class, I received this message from Michael, and he gave me permission to share it with all of you. I want to show you the question that he asked, because it's possible it's others of you may have a similar question. And let me see if I can get move this up a little bit. There we go. I'm going to read it, and I'll give you what I think is my answer, and you can tell me if you have a different opinion. He says, of the many, many questions I have, I would like just to mention one. You introduced the idea of married couple that doesn't express love for that it has for each other last week as a parable to answer the common questions. Why can't I just love Hashem in my heart? Why do I need to do all these things? This is the topic we dealt with last week. However, here's his question. I can't possibly answer those questions for the simple reason that a married couple are human beings who cannot see into each other's hearts without external expressions of love taking place between them, something which Hashem has no need for since he knows exactly what everyone feels. As we describe him during the Yamin Norim, that he is the one who sees into the heart. So this only strengthens the original two questions above, and therefore the parable of a human married couple is powerless to answer them. Okay, I'm going to tell you my answer. No, he's basically saying that the mashal, the parable, the comparison I keep using of husband and wife and showing love, not showing love, just feeling it in the heart is it doesn't stand up. My answer is, that's right. It doesn't. It can't. I mean, I think this only bolsters the whole point. The whole point of a lot of Tanya is, and we're going to see this dafka tonight if we get to it, is there is no way whatsoever. It's like, think of like an amoeba wants to have a relationship with Albert Einstein. Okay. It can't happen. There's just no, and the amoeba can't even understand it. Even if Albert Einstein speaks amoeba language, it can't happen. And that's just maybe a poor example. But all we can do is to use what is, I understand that, of course, that if I don't show my love for my wife, even though I feel it in my heart, how is she supposed to know just from how I'm feeling inside? And on the other hand, Hashem knows how I'm feeling. Okay, again, a legitimate comment. But at the same time, we have to work with what we have. And since there is no comparison, and if I mentioned before already that there's a tefillah that is said in the morning and before mincha by Sfaradim called Patach Eliyahu, where it talks about this idea and we say it also in the Navi, Yishayahu, Kilo machshavotai machshavotechem, which we're going to talk about tonight. My thoughts are not like your thoughts. There is no comparison. I think that's the whole point. So all we can do is to give some semblance of familiarity to this idea of how do we connect to this whole idea of that we have to to show our love. We actually have to do something proactive. However, that's the short answer. The long answer is it's going to take many, many months for us to see how this all works together and why, even more so than just this chapter, when he spends multiple chapters on Ahava and then Yir'ah later, how that helps to build the connection. And it is definitely not enough just to have it in your mind or in your heart. Okay, that's the first thing. Second slide. Riddle. Who found the connection in this past week's parsha to what we are learning in Tanya? Okay, last week's parsha, Parshat Tetzaveh, we talked Tetzaveh. Wait, when did I write this? Hold on. Sorry, 2 weeks ago. I thought about this last week because past week was Kitisa, but 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, Parshat Tetzaveh. What was the connection? Anyone remember or catch on to it? It wasn't even subtle. Feel free to guess or take yourself off mute and try. And if not, I'll give you the answer. I should have actually had that Jeopardy music playing. And the answer is, I'll take Parsha for 50. Here it is. Hashem says to Moshe, Re'eh karati v'shem Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur l'matei Yehuda. Hashem says, I have singled out, I have called by name, Betzalel, the son of Uri, son of Chur, to the tribe of Judah. What does he say? Va'amalei oto ruach Elokim. I have filled him, I have endowed him with divine spirit of Chochmah, Tivuna, Uvedat, Uvechol Melacha. Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. This is exactly what we've been talking about in the chapters prior to what we're on tonight. In the last chapter, in Perek Gimel, we talked about Chet Bet Dal, the Chochmah, Bina, and Dat connection, which are the 3 out of the 10 of the building blocks, so to speak, of the Neshama Elokit. We're dealing now with midot. We're dealing now with ahava. But we remember that it was the chokhmah and binah that led to the da'at, and we described and we explained da'at as being the connection. It wasn't just knowledge. It's definitely not just knowledge, but it meant the connection, such as in V'adam yadat chava ishto. That was the example he gave. Okay, now to our question for tonight. We spoke about, and we sort of talked about this at the end of last week and kind of ran out of time as we began to talk about Yirat Hashem. We spoke about at length last week that I can, doing mitzvot aseh, 248, through loving Hashem, proactively doing his mitzvot, creates a connection to Hashem. The Admor HaZaken hypothesizes, and not only hypothesizes, but states the same thing is true when it comes to Yirat Hashem. Now, what does that mean? On the one hand, I can understand, this is the question where we left off last week, I can understand that my doing something, my proactively doing a mitzvah, where I keep Shabbat, where I keep kosher, where I do hafrashat challah, all these things, that it's showing my love for Hashem. And he says it's really only going to have kiyum, it's only really considered true keeping the mitzvah when I do it from a place of love and desire. Did I do the mitzvah if I didn't have in mind all the kavanot and the love? You did the mitzvah, but you didn't do it the best way possible, and you certainly did not create this permanent link between you and Hashem at that particular mitzvah. But again, I can intellectually understand how ahava, love, can create that connection between me and Hashem. Question is, how do we connect to Hashem through yirah? And I mentioned last week that there are 3 different ways to translate the word yirah, in my humble opinion. And then I'm going to tell you a creepy story. Oh, not creepy, freaky. That one is fear, that we're fear of Hashem, which, by the way, parenthetically, you know that this, we say in Hebrew is a kippah. In Arabic, the word kafiyah that they wrap their head in, the same shoresh, the Semitic shoresh, same shoresh. But it's also known, especially you talk more of like a Yiddishized English, called a yarmulke. What does the word yarmulke come from? And the weird spelling is yarmulke, Yarmulke. Where does that come from? It comes right from the Gemara, which says that I think it was Rabbi Meir, whose mother told him you should cover your head so that you should have yarei malka, you should have the fear of the melech on your head. So yarmulke is the anglicized version of the yarei malka. So that's just a parenthetical comment. But the question is, the statement is that on one hand we have yirah, fear of Hashem. The other we talked about was awe, and the other was lirot, the word, a concept of to see God in everything. The creepy or freaky kind of story is literally the moment we finished class last week, before I did anything else, I clicked end session, and one of our emails popped up. I don't know how I got on this email list. I get PDFs of scholarly papers. I almost never read them because, first of all, they're long and they have 10,000 footnotes, and sometimes they're usually very boring. What was this one called? And I saved it. I'm going to at some point share it with you. It was about Yirat Hashem. It was a paper in English. All the papers I get are in English, and this is about Yirat Hashem. And it starts out with the thesis that there are 3 ways to describe this word, exactly what I just said that night, which is kind of cool. And that wasn't because it came up because of Google or listening to my conversation or Facebook or whoever else. But it was actually just a nice little message from God, I guess. Dear Seb, hi, I've been listening too, not just Facebook. Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's take a look at where we left off last week. Oop, went too far, and we'll make this bigger. Okay. We're picking it up at the end of the line here. It says v'hayirah. We read a little bit of it last week. What we're going to do is I'm going to read a few lines. We're going to spend some time reading some commentaries, both from Rav Steinsaltz and from, I think from Rav Ginsburg. I forgot already. And then we're going to go through, hopefully, many, many lines of text with a thread of an idea. And I'll give you a general explanation, but more in depth next week. That's the general plan for tonight, if we get to it all. Hopefully we will. Okay. V'hayirah, right over here. Okay. V'hayirah, he shoresh l'shin samach lo ta'aseh. That the yirah, when we serve Hashem with yirah, whose source is the 365 mitzvot lo ta'aseh, things you're not allowed to do. Why? How do we serve Hashem in such a way? On the simplistic level, and I don't mean simple, I don't mean it's like Aleph Bet, but on the base level, this kind of yirah is that the person is afraid to rebel against the Melech Malchei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of Kings, God. That's the one level of yirah. Oh, another possibility of yirah we're talking about here, and it's a much deeper level, which we will see in the slides. Yirah pnimit. This is more of a more internal, deeper fear. Mizo shemitboshesh migdulato, where a person is ashamed in the face of Hashem's greatness. Lamrot einei kvodo v'la'asot hara be'einav kol ta'avat Hashem asher saneh. Okay, so he says like this. It's hard to distinguish if you just look at the words of what the difference is between these two types of fear. One fear is he doesn't want to rebel against the king. Straightforward, right? Just put it into normal terms. You work for a boss. You don't want to, you work for a company, and you don't want to do anything that should cause harm or damage to the company. You're afraid of causing damage because you respect, you honor the company, you honor your boss, you honor whatever it might be. And therefore you have a fear, in quotes, of doing something that would rebel against that. But now let's talk about it in terms of Hashem. You don't do it. Why don't I go on my phone on Shabbat? Why don't I start sending text messages? I'm not going to talk about half Shabbos, as it's called, which is a machla that's out there right now. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's good. But why don't I go on the phone? Well, on this, again, base level would be because I am afraid to rebel against the king. The king gave me a mitzvah that said, you cannot do certain things on Shabbat. There are things you have to do and things you're supposed to do and you should do. That was the first part. That's the ahava. But he also said the things you can't do on Shabbat. So therefore, on the simplistic level, again, I don't mean it in the common terminology, is but what does this mean? Yirah pnimit, which is a greater and deeper fear. What does it mean, yirat haboshet? What does it mean to be afraid or to be ashamed in when you're faced with the grandeur of Hashem? I'll explain that in a minute, but we have to continue reading a little bit more before we do, because this next thing is a bit scary. What I mean scary is it's a bit of an eye-opener. Listen to this. It says that the person is afraid because of his fear, of his shame, of being in the in place of gadlut of Hashem, right? And to do evil in the eyes of Hashem, which is considered a to'eva, an abomination that God hates. And what is it that he hates? Haklipot v'sitra achra. You remember we said in the beginning of the book, we translated these two concepts. The klipa is that which encircles, is like the cover, the peel that covers that which may be kadosh. For example, a pen or a pencil in this case. This is klipa. Why is it klipa? It's not kadosh. Remember, when it came to kedusha, we talked about this a long time ago. It's either kadosh or it's not kadosh. It has kedusha. It doesn't have kedusha. I pulled up a pair of tefillin. You can see innately it's kedusha. It has kedusha to it. I hold up a pencil. It doesn't. But by doing something with this, I write something like a Dvar Torah with it. I now elevate this. The klipa is removed, and it has a level of kedusha while it's being used. So he says that when a person does an avera, and he doesn't do an avera rather, and because of he's ashamed to do something in the face of the gadlut of Hashem, because in the face of God, all these things of doing an avera, what does it do? It's not just that you're doing something, that you're involving your something in the klipa or the sitra acha. Remember, sitra acha just means the other side of the coin of kedusha. It says asher yenikatam meha adam hatachton va'achizatam bohu b'shin samachay mitzvot lo ta'aseh. I'm going to just give an explanation, not direct translation. He says here that when we do an avera, what is it we're doing? We're actually giving yinika. We're giving sustenance and life. We're animating. We're giving succor, succor. We're giving succor to the sitra achra and the klipa. Meaning, let's use this pencil as an example. Let's say this pencil I have it sitting on the table on Shabbat. I pick it up, it's muksa. Okay, I did something dirabanan that's not okay. I write a few words with it. I write a Dvar Torah with it. Doesn't make a difference what I write with it. I have now given this, what is sitting here in a static state of Sitra Achra, a static state of Klipa, and I have given it sustenance because I've used it on Shabbat for something I'm not allowed to use it for. I have infused it, I've given it more power. So when I do that, I'm not only not doing what God said to, I'm not only doing God what he said not to do, but I'm even giving life, in quotes, chiyut, to that sitra achra, to that klipa of that object. But we still need to understand a little bit more of what is this idea of yirat haboshet and the other, so to speak, regular busha. So let's take a look at a couple of slides. Okay, let me make this a little smaller. Okay. And here is another thing tonight. This is one of the things, as I was learning Tanya over the last couple of years, that I came across ideas that I said, oh, I can't wait to share this one. And this is one of those. So I'm going to give you, at the beginning of the book, one of the things we said is you're going to learn that there are definitions that we're used to that we're going to get a new meaning of. And this is going to be one of them. So I love this. Ready? Here we go. Kishadam over lo ta'aseh. When a person does a mitzvat lo ta'aseh, meaning they transgress something, ve'over chalila avera, and they do a sin, mikablot mikach haklipot v'sitra achra, hatzad acher hamenugad shel kedusha, yinika v'chiyut. So what I just now was saying is that when we do a sin, the klipot, which means the tzad acher, the sitra achra, which means the tzad acher, or the klipa, this covering, this peel that doesn't allow kedusha to come through. By doing an avera, we are giving yinika, we're giving life force or life source, chiyut, to that klipa, and to that sitra acha. Umipnei shaklipot v'sitra acha mechasot al elokut ve'al kedusha. Since the klipa covers elokut, covers godliness, it doesn't cover God, chas v'shalom, we can't say that. But it covers elokut. Remember, we talked about the concept of godliness. V'kadosh baruch hu sonei otan, and God hates them, meaning the sitra achra and klipa. Nizhar hayudi, the Jew is careful, umitbayesh mila'avor avera, and he is embarrassed to do any avera. Why? Kedei shelo lechazek otan, in order to not strengthen those things, the klipa and sitra acha, v'shelo latet lem chiyut, and to not give them chiyut. Meaning, I don't want to do the first level is I don't want to do an avera because God said don't do it. I'm afraid to go against what God said. The deeper one is that not only did God say not to do it, God says I hate the results of that avera. The result of that avera is that this klipa that you're looking at right now just got fed. You just gave it more life. You just gave God something that he hates so much, and you fed the birds. You fed the animals, so to speak. That is the klipa and the sitra achra. And that is where you are afraid. You don't want to have that. You're embarrassed to do something like that. When my kids were growing up, and I know I've used this example before, my kids were growing up, the principal of the school they were growing up in, that they were learning in, and who was the same principal that I had growing up, his name was Rabbi Meir Shapiro, Zichur Tzadik Livracha, amazing individual, same name as the one who founded the Daf Yomi program many, many years ago. And very often, it usually seemed to be Shabbat, when they were doing something that I felt was not the most appropriate, I would say to them, let me ask you a question. Would you do that if Rabbi Shapiro were sitting here at the table? And of course they said, no. I said, well, why would you do it if I'm sitting here? Or I didn't give them the whole guilt trip. Well, God sees everything. And I try not to do that, put that scary idea in their head. But, there's this, on the one hand, just the presence of the individual. Now, let's say, not only is that individual not there, now he is there at the table. So you're afraid to do what, you want to maybe act a little bit better, right? When you have guests that are maybe people you have some higher level respect for than just another friend at your table, and you want to be on your best behavior. So not only do you want to be on your best behavior, you also don't want to do something that's going to be go anathema to that guest. So let's assume for a moment someone comes to your table let's say the Chavetz Chaim came to your table for Shabbat. I don't know, I could never do that. Not a chance. But let's assume for a minute you have the guts to have the Chavetz Chaim at the table for your Shabbat meal. Halvai, you should be able to. So you're going to be careful. You make your brachot properly and you act properly and all. But would you, for a minute, think you'd measure every word to be careful not to speak Lashon Hara? Why? Because that's who he was. He embodied the concept of the anti-Lashon Hara, right? That's who he was known for. What he was known for. He's also the author of the Mishnah Berurah and so much else. But it was specifically Lashon Hara of Shmirat HaLashon. So you wouldn't want to cause him, besides the fact it's wrong, you also don't want to make him feel bad that you're sitting there speaking Lashon Hara in his face. Same thing is over here. The person is mitbayesh, he's not just afraid to go against the Melech Malchei Amlachim. His yirah goes even deeper. He doesn't want to make God feel uncomfortable. He's doing something and feeding the monster. What happens when a person desists from doing an Aveira? What they're really doing is they're being Mekayim in mitzvah. They're keeping the mitzvah of don't do something. I'm sitting here now, I'm not talking Lashon Hara, right? I did a mitzvah. It is the fear of God that causes this, that brings about the internal motor, as it were, machinations of the Jew. Mikol ha'amur. Is it going to be this slide or the next one about what I want to tell you, the new definition? I'm going to give it to you in this definition, even though it's, I think, in the next slide. From all this, it's understandable now to see what is the connection between yir'ah, and he's going to go more into it, but right now in this stage, between yir'ah and ahava when it comes to kiyum hamitzvot. Ve'ech hamidot mehavot shoresh v'chiyut hamitlabshim. And then we can use this idea, and we're just going to expand on it, how these midot, ahava and yir'ah, are the source and the life force of that which gives life to a mitzvah, or a good mitzvah, a positive or a negative one. Now, if that sounds a little bit hard to understand, hang in there, we're going to get to it. But here we go. I'm going to read one more paragraph. This is from Rav Ginsburg. I want to read one more paragraph, and now I'll give you that new definition. He's talking now also about this idea of what does it mean to be embarrassed of doing a mitzvah? What does it mean to be in fear of doing a mitzvah, of an avera rather? When a Jew who has, as we've said multiple times, who has a chelek elokam imal, actually, literally from Hashem, when he does an action that is connected to the klipot, meaning he does an avera, harehu b'chach ma'avir et hachiyut elokit shebenafsho el haklipot. This is an unbelievable statement that I will now spend a moment on. Listen to the words. I'm going to reread it. I'm going to translate it slowly. Harei b'chach, by doing so, when a person does an avera, when they involve themselves in the klipa, hu ma'avir, he transfers from lashon avera leha-avir, to transfer something, the chiyut elokit shebenafsho, the life source God gave you in your neshama elokit, to the klipa. Why is it called an avera? We translate it into English as he did a sin. but it really means to over, right? To go over something, to transgress. But it's deeper than that, much deeper. It is that the source that we have in our neshama elokit of complete kedusha, when we do an aveira, we're ma'avir, we're moving, we're transferring that level to give that life source, to give life source to the klipa and the sitra achra. That's an unbelievable, deep definition. I'm going to add another definition that he's going to talk about later, but it fits in here perfectly, so I'm going to talk about it also. We go off the screen share for a minute. Number one, we gave a new meaning to the word aveira. It still means what it meant before. It's sin, a sin. But now you have a deeper understanding. The life source that Hashem gave you in your nefesh elokit transfers that life source to give life source, as it were, to the klipa and sitra achra, which is anathema to Hashem. Beautiful. Let's go a step further. I mentioned the following in Mesilat Yesharim class months and months ago. So some of you have already heard this. But again, it fits here. If you look in halacha, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, you look in Pnei Halacha, you look in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, everywhere you look, you see two words when it comes to halacha. Three. Mutar, it's permissible. Asur, and let's just keep it those two words. Mutar and asur. We translate them as permitted or permissible. Asur, forbidden. Asur behechlet. You see that all the time on signs. Asur ledaber b'shat hatfilah, or in some shows asur lehitpalel b'shat hadibur. Sorry, means you're not allowed to daven while people are talking. Anyways, but what do those words mean? They don't mean permitted and forbidden. They don't mean that. How do I know? If I have a dog and I'm taking it on its leash, it has to be asur. It has to be connected. It has to be tied up, right? Mutar means loosened. It means released. Matir asurim. We say the bracha every morning, right? He's one who releases those who are in captivity. So what is the connection? What does it mean when we say that a person does an aveira? That a person does an action, it's either mutar or asur. It means when you do something that you're allowed to do, it's mutar, means it's disconnected from klipa. It's disconnected from sitra achra. When you do an aveira, you're connected to sitra achra. You're attached to this klipa. So now we have three definitions on three different words. An aveira, which means that you're ma'avir, you're moving, you're transferring. For anyone who's ever done in Hebrew, ha'avara bankait, you transfer money from your account to someone else's account. It's called a ha'avara bankait, le'ha'avir, to cause to be transferred. You are doing a ha'avara bankait, as it were, but it's a ha'avara chiyutit. There's such a word. You are transferring life source that God gave you for good, and you're feeding it and giving life source to sitra achra. In addition to that, you learn two new definitions of asur and mutar. Asur means you're connected. Why is it prohibited? Because it's connected to sitra achra. What does it mean by definition? It's connected to sitra achra. It means that there's no kedusha. We're not supposed to go towards that direction. What we are allowed to do is what's mutar, right? Mutar, chayav is a different meaning. And that which is permitted means it is released from, it's not connected to sitra achra, and it's not connected to the the idea of klipa. I just want to finish that slide. I'm going to look in the text. In the bottom here, it says, "Achizatam bo hu b'shin samachem mitzvot lo ta'aseh." That was the beginning of this little section we're doing here. Just turn my page here a second. Right. Okay, that's actually comes after, that's the last few words I didn't read. But it means, again, that holding on to the klipot, you are then enabling, so to speak, the sitra achra through the 365 mitzvot lo taseh. B'chol pam shayudi over chas v'chalila. This is now, he's going to say exactly what I just said. Avera. Anytime a Jew does an avera, God forbid, arehu ma'avir b'cha chas v'shalom chiyut nosefet leklipot u'mechazek v'achman alitzlan. What are you doing? Again, I'm going to take it off screen share and just not just repeat my words, but give it a little deeper. What does it mean? Okay, we understood just now the concept of transferring this life source into the klipa sitra achra. Anathema to God. We don't want to have that. We're mitbayesh to do something like that. But what does it mean? The more the sitra achra, the more that klipa is infused with chiyut, with life source, the more elokut, the more godliness gets covered up. It's not just that you're feeding it. You're also dimming the light. It's a terminology we're going to see throughout the book later on. You're dimming the light of God in the world. Imagine for a moment, I had actually right above me, it's actually working right now, but one of the light bulbs this morning in my fixture on the ceiling this morning started flickering, okay? Imagine every time a person does an Aveira, the light bulb goes out. You imagine that, right? You have bright light and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. Because that's exactly what you're doing when you do an Aveira. You're extinguishing that light. But every time you do a mitzvah, you're flipping a light switch on. You're bringing more light into this world. You're bringing more elokut. You're bringing more godliness, more kedusha. And that's what's going on in this chapter here. It's talking about ahava and yirah, that both through ahava, the turning the light on, bringing elokut, doing the godliness, making sure we do what Hashem wants. That's how we connect to God in that way. And on the other hand, when we step back and we don't do the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, and we don't just avoid them. Obviously, I'm being a little facetious by my saying here, I'm accomplishing so many mitzvot lo ta'aseh and not doing them. I'm doing so many mitzvot, but it's not. It's when I have the opportunity, when I can do it. Maybe it's even when I don't have the opportunity. We'll eventually talk about that. But begadol, I'm not feeding the sitra achra. I'm not covering up elokut. So therefore, by not covering up elokut, I'm revealing more. I'm bringing more godliness into the world. And that's through yirah. And by that way, we're able to also serve Hashem. Let's go back to the text now. And we're going to read many lines. I'm going to translate some into English in general, but I'm not going to give an exact understanding yet of the words, because this is going to require us to go back and to kind of pick up some of this information. Let me just get something here on my screen. Just a second. Sorry. So I have it here. And then I'll go back to the to sharing, screen share. Screen share for the text. Nope, not that. This. Okay, I'm going to start now where it says Vihine. Okay, now he's talked about the beginning of this chapter, so we don't forget, he's talked about the three levushim. Machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. Thought, speech, and action. So I'm going to read these few lines and a bunch of lines on the next page, translating part of it. Then I'm going to go back and pick up and explain what he's talking about in general terms. V'hinei shelosha levushim elu mehatorah umitzvoteha. These three levushim from the Torah and the mitzvot, meaning keeping Torah and mitzvot, af shenikraim levushim lenefesh ruach neshama, even though we term them as being the garments of the ruach, of the nefesh ruach neshama, meaning our godly soul. Im kol zeh, in spite of that, govha v'godla ma'alatan le'en ketz v'sof amalat nefesh ruach neshama atzman. This I will translate and explain before we go on. If I stopped here and I said, okay, let me ask you a question. Let's take a vote. We learned already about the fact that we have a nefesh ruach neshama. We have this nefesh elokit. We also learned that the nefesh elokit doesn't do any mitzvot. How does the nefesh elokit express itself in this world? Through the levushim, machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. So what would you say is on a higher level, the neshama elokit or the levushim? Remember, the levushim are something I can literally, almost literally, just like clothing, put on and take off. Neshama elokit, nitzchi. Neshama elokit, chelek elokah mimal. So on the intellectual level, you would probably guess or say the neshama elokit is at a much higher level. It's a chelek elokah mimal. But I'm expressing it through human action, machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. And therefore, naran, nefesh, ruach, neshama, or the neshama elokit, is the higher level, and the levushim are the lower level. And he's telling us it's exactly the opposite. Not only are the levushim on a higher level than the neshama elokit, but they are, as he says here, in kozeh gavoa ugdola mima'alatan le'en kates v'sof. They're infinitely bigger, greater, more, and higher than the neshama itself. How? When I'm speaking right now, that's not, how is that on a higher level than my neshama elokit? That's left to be seen. He's going to expand on it a little bit now, and much more later in the book. It says in the Zohar that it says in the Zohar, you may have heard this expression differently. You may have heard Torah, whatever. Mean the Torah and God are one and the same. Perush, what does that mean? The Torah is Hashem's wisdom, and His will. And God is one unit, right? There's no such thing. You don't God doesn't come into parts. As we've already said, Hu hayodeh v'hu hamada. He is the one who knows and is the knowledge. Which we already said before in the name of the Rambam. Let me make this bigger. Even though God is called the Ein Sof, the infinite. And there's no way to truly understand God's greatness. And no intellect whatsoever, human intellect or other, can truly grasp anything about God. Nor about His will, nor His wisdom. As it's written, he's going to quote a few psukim. There's no ability to truly understand his knowledge. It also says, even though there's all these psukim that say there's no way that our intellect can understand His. And based on this concept that God's wisdom is infinite and God's wisdom is something we cannot comprehend, nevertheless it says, in the very place you find God's greatness, I can't even say the word, anvetunato. You also find His true humility. What does that mean? And again, let me read these lines and explain. God, as it were, contracted His wisdom, His will. What does it mean? He contracted them into what? Mitzvot HaTorah, v'hilchotehen, into the 613 mitzvot of the Torah and their halachot, their laws, uvetzirufei otiot, and their combination of letters, Tanakh, in the Tanakh, udrashotehem she'abagadot, and the drashot and all the agadot, the legends and lore, umidrashei chachamenu zichronon livracha. Why did God do all that? So that every neshama, every spirit of all of us, will be able to acquire bid'ata, with its ability, with its knowledge, and again, I'll explain deeper, but right now we're saying, what he's saying is that Hashem had to do to contract this massive, infinite wisdom, massive, infinite will, to contract it into something that we as humans can deal with. And how do we deal with it? Number one, He gave us 613 mitzvot and everything that goes with it, all the midrashim, Talmud, halacha, and our ability to connect to it through machshava, dibur, and maaseh. Ve'al yedei zeh, and through that, meaning through machshava, dibur, and maaseh, titlabesh b'chol eser bechinoteha yishlosha levushim ela. We use those 3 levushim to enrobe, as it were, the neshama made up of the 10 parts, and we serve Hashem and connect to God. Now that's a mouthful. I'm going to give you just a little synopsis of what I just said, and then we're going to go deeper into it next week. Bezrat Hashem. That's the goal. The obvious question should be, is how do we understand Torah at all? How do we understand? Torah is infinite. If Hashem is infinite, and Hashem and the Torah are the same, or one and the same, and it says about its own, how do we even understand it? We can't understand God. We can't learn God. We can talk about Hashem. We can theorize. But how do we connect? So Hashem had to do what was called, in Kabbalistic terms, tzimtzum. It has multiple meanings, but right now I'm just going to go with this one right now. Hashem took all that information and brought it down to a level that he could hand to us to say, here, you want to connect to me. Here's what you need. This is my ratzon. This is my will. This is what I want you to do. This is what I don't want you to do. And I'm giving you a neshama elokit in your body. It's a part of me. And by the way, that neshama elokit can't do anything. It's there. It's a part of me. It can't do anything other than imbue your body with kedusha. You want to do something about it? I'm giving you 3 tools. And those 3 tools are called levushim. And they're going to cover up, as it were, they're going to be the levushim of this 10-parted neshama. And through machshava, thought, dibur, speech, and maaseh, action, you're going to do my mitzvot. And every single time you do one of my mitzvot out of ahava, and every time you don't do an aveira because of yirah, you are connecting to me, says Hashem. You're using the levushim to raise up everything in this world to what my ratzon is. And this is why, we'll go into depth more next week, Bezrat Hashem, but this is why the levushim are on a higher level, in more respect, than the neshama itself. Because it is only through the levushim that we can connect to the ratzon Hashem, do the ratzon Hashem, and connect to God himself. Ki yachol. Okay. A lot of heavy stuff for 45 minutes. I want to end, I don't know if Malka was on in the beginning or not, but just Malka, again, we'll share with your Bezrat Hashem tefillot that Hallel should have a refuah shlema. She should be able to get strong enough and healthy enough to have the surgery she needs and be home with the family, the karov.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, I wish everyone a good evening. And there's a lot of stuff here. Like I say, we'll do a little review next week before we jump back into it. We'll hear from Rav Steinsaltz and others, Bezrat Hashem. Should you have any questions, comments, please feel free to message me. If it's something you feel goes in the group, put it in the group. If you want a one-on-one, just message me and we'll discuss. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.